Thank you so much. To introduce myself, my name is Abana Lakao. I'm currently working for the Ministry of Water and Energy as an advisor to the Minister of the Ministry of Water and Energy of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. And I'm also a project coordinator for the World Bank Finance project called Horn of Africa Groundwater for Resilience project. Professionally, I am a hydrogeologist and environmental engineer. It is really an honor and a privilege for me to deliver an opening remark representing our ministry and this very important and timely online workshop on the topic groundwater governance tools and opportunities in Ethiopia. It is indeed a pleasure to know that so many dedicated individuals appeared in this platform. I have seen around 31 participants so far. It is really for a common goal, which is to enhance our understanding in the management of groundwater resource in Ethiopia. Your participation underscores the importance of this issue, not only for our nation, but also for the broader region and the global community. Let me start my speech by appreciating the organizers of this workshop who made it successful. Specifically, I would like to thank Your Excellency Ambassador Dr. Engineer Seleshi Bakala for reaching out and linking us to CGIAR Initiative on NEXUS Gains for Water, Food, Energy Ecosystems and the International Food Policy Research Institute, and be able to sponsor this online workshop. As we all know, Ethiopia is endowed with abundant natural resources and cultural heritage, but is also faces significant challenges related to water resource management. Reports indicate that Ethiopia has annual recharge potential of around 123 billion cubic meters surface water and an estimated 36 to 40 billion cubic meters of groundwater. This number is really an estimate, and you could find different numbers subject to further study. When we look at the development perspective, groundwater plays the greater role and is being used for agricultural production, drinking water supply, and other economic development activities. It accounts for a substantial portion of our water supply, especially in regions where surface water is scarce and rainfall is erratic. However, the growing pressure of climate change, population growth, and unsustainable practice threaten the sustainability of this precious resource. The limited knowledge on its distribution, space, and time, the huge investment cost it requires to study and develop, lack of competent drilling companies, lack of monitoring and management systems, and limited research and capacity building initiatives are the key challenges that need to be addressed by the government and stakeholders. This online workshop presents us with a unique opportunity to delve into the complexities of groundwater governance in Ethiopia. I am informed that there have been efforts or researches related to groundwater governance by different scholars, and hope today's presentations cover some of them, and will together explore the current challenges, share best practices, and identify innovative solutions that can help us manage our groundwater resource more effectively and sustainably. I expect that our discussions will not only focus on the technical aspects of groundwater management, but also on the social, economic, and environmental dimensions that are critical to achieve sustainable groundwater governance. I also expect a resource mobilization from research institutions, at least for research activities. Our ministry is always committed to support any activities in this regard. Once again, I would like to express my appreciation to each of you for your commitment to this important cause. Your participation today is a testament to your dedication to improving groundwater governance in Ethiopia. Together, let us seize this opportunity to learn from one another and develop actionable advisory notes to decision makers that will lead to more effective management of our groundwater resource. Thank you, and I look forward to an engaging and productive discussion and deliberations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zabana, for this precise opening remark and informing us the expectation from the workshop from the point of view of the Ministry of Water and Energy. Now, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Claudia Ringler to make her opening speech on behalf of IFPRI. Dr. Claudia is the Director of Natural Resources and Resilience in the Transformation and Strategy Department of IFPRI. The floor is yours, Dr. Claudia.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ambassador Seleshi, for the kind introduction, and thanks to everyone for joining us at this very important workshop this morning. So I mostly would like to introduce you on behalf of the CGIAR Initiative on NEXUS Gains. So NEXUS is obviously, I think, what the Ministry of Water and Energy is all about, but it's also what we feel very strongly is a linkage that helps us to achieve many of the development objectives of Ethiopia and obviously in many other low and middle income countries and in high income countries, because we know that water resources support energy production, support food production, are essential for ecosystem health. At the same time, energy is essential for all the other sectors as is food. And so we're basically looking towards reducing trade-offs across these sectors and also to identify synergies and multiple benefits. And groundwater resources are really at the center of the water energy food nexus. It's a water resource. It requires some form of energy to lift, and most of it is used for food production, but of course also for drinking water, and drinking water is also a food. So yeah, I think this is a very important topic, and groundwater resources are much more challenging to govern. They're more challenging to manage because we don't see them. They're somewhere underground. We don't know exactly where the groundwater resources are. We don't know how much they are. We don't know how many people depend on the same confined aquifer. So I think it's a very important topic. And in 2023, when we visited some groundwater areas in Ethiopia where we previously had worked on a groundwater governance intervention, experiential games that help farmers understand how the groundwater system was operating and how they after we basically visited the Ministry of Water and Energy, and they strongly suggested that we should work with them to support their water policy and their groundwater policy. And I think this workshop is really the first output from this engagement last year. And I think the key is this is only the beginning, and we hope to support the ministry and to support researchers, but also to see how the existing very large capacity on water and groundwater resources in Ethiopia can directly support the government to move forward towards better management and governance of groundwater resources. This workshop, of course, builds on previous work done by the World Bank, Meta, and the Stockholm International Water Institute, CV, and other previous government documents. And while the NEXUS Gains initiative finishes this year, we hope to use this workshop to identify collaboration, to identify new research and work activities going forward. And with that, I wish everyone a successful, insightful, exciting, motivating event going forward. And I hand back to Ambassador Seleshi and thank him again for being available shepherd this event and also for all the advice he has provided. Thank you very much.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And you're
we
seeing
can
it
see
correct.
the full screen.
Okay.
Seeing presentation.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and Dr. Ringler for these all for the introduction. It's a pleasure to share with you some of what we've learned from a global review and a special issue of a journal on groundwater governance. I'm going to talk briefly about what a framework that we have developed that may have applicability, and then we'll get into some of the details of how this might apply in Ethiopia. This was some work with Brian Bruns on. First of all, I think Claudia has set the stage about why groundwater governance is challenging, because it's a common pool resource. What one person uses is not available for others, but it's difficult to exclude others from using it. And it's even more complicated because it's invisible and it's what we call a fugitive resource. It moves around. There are a lot of tools for groundwater management and governance, but not a lot of examples of success. What we do need is governance or institutions, arrangements that coordinate across different actors, both at the local level, individual farmers or water users, but also at higher levels across government departments, even across sectors, because we have both agriculture and drinking water, and industry sometimes using groundwater. It's often characterized as wicked problems in that there's not even a lot of agreement about what the problems are, and there's sort of incomplete information, contradictory and changing conditions. Well, then what can we do? We suggest that instead of starting with tools, start with identifying who are the key actors and consider what they need in terms of three categories: knowledge of the groundwater conditions or problems, motivation to address those problems, and agency or mechanisms to act. And then think about what combination of tools can equip them. In terms of knowledge, we're not just talking about data or information, but knowledge as the ability to use information strategically to achieve one's objectives, and in this case, something related to groundwater. Knowledge shapes how people understand their situation, what we call their mental models. As an example of mental models, in Ethiopia, a study by Deselin and Mary found that while farmers understand the social nature of community-managed irrigation, when it's surface water, they share with policymakers sometimes a narrow understanding of pump irrigation as being primarily technical. And they see pumps as liberating from the social limitations of traditional communal irrigation. But when you get rapid expansion of pump irrigation, it leads to increasing competition and conflict, and hence a need for some kind of social interaction about water. So then we get to motivation. That's the desire to act in service of a goal. And that applies to water users, communities, government, as well as other actors. Now, there's different kinds of motivation. We often think about external motivation through regulation, which is fear of punishment, or economic incentives, desire for gain, but there can be social sanctions or norms. It's also important to remember internal sources of motivation, such as care, internalized values and worldviews, and intrinsic motivations, things that are done just for their own sake. A lot of times on politics. Yes.
Warning.
Okay. Then if we don't, we need to not focus too much on external motivations that might crowd out internal. But how do we appeal to that? Then finally, we get to agency, mechanisms for action. Can you produce desired outcomes to shape the biophysical and social conditions, including influencing conduct of others? In other words, if people want to do something about groundwater, what can they do? Coordination is always required with groundwater, so agency is relational, and power relations can constrain agency. So in terms of a toolbox, we say start with the key actors and what they need, contextualize and adapt the tools, and combine them. One tool can contribute to more than one of these categories. For example, experiential learning games that we're going to hear about can contribute to knowledge and motivation, crop water budgeting to knowledge and agency, and multi-stakeholder platforms to motivation and agency. We have a number of resources available here, and these will be shared with you in the presentations. Now I'll turn it over to our next presenter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I'm Hagar El-Didi, and thank you, Ambassador. Together with Dr. Fikadu Gulau, where we collaborated on a project to implement some of those tools that Ruth was talking about, I'd like to share with you our experience in piloting experiential learning games for groundwater governance in Ethiopia. And there is a paper that's also part of the special issue that Ruth was talking about. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Fikadu Gulau to take us forward.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we.
Good morning for the North America and good afternoon for Ethiopians. My name is Fikadu. I'm currently working at Water and Land Resource Center. I left Haramaya University. Currently, I'm working in Water and Land Resource Center. I will be presenting portion of the slides, and finally, Hagar will present the final 2 slides. By stimulating the context of real-life common resource using game, the research aimed to promote experiential learning in improving resource governances. So the research question was, to what extent can the experimental learning intervention change individual mental model, stimulate conversation among community members, and lead to real action to improve groundwater? I should put my camera on. Okay. So it tests to assess the immediate effect of learning effect or on perception of participants by comparing the situation before the game and after the game. In addition to that, we also compare the situation between treatment qabalis and control qabalis. The study area was carried out in 4 waradas around Butajra, which in the then name Southern nationalities, currently named as Central region of Ethiopia. It's around southeastern part of Ethiopia. The game played by group in 15 treatment qabalis, selected using standard sampling and with detailed scoping. In each treatment qabali, we have 2 groups, 1 female group and the other male groups, each constituting 5 players. Each player is interviewed twice. First, before the game, we interview them, and then we finally also, immediately after the game, we interview them to understand their perception, compare their perception about groundwater management, and understand their decision-making process in crop choice. Because we give them two alternative crops. One is water consuming, the other is hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We
The
hear you.
slide is
Go
not
ahead.
moving. Okay. In this treatment, Kabale, we have first, I can go to the next slide. Yeah. So each group plays 3 types of game. The first one is no communication. In this game, there's no talking. Players make their crop choices secretly, and only the outcome on water level, the cumulative outcome on water level is revealed to the participants. The second, with communication, here participants discuss about the result of their individual choice and agree on what to do next, but they eventually make individual choices as usual secretly. They only discuss on the final outcome, and there is no further action. In this final third game, participants will discuss and make some rules together with how to monitor that rule and enforcement mechanism. They put penalties and sanctions, as Ruth was mentioning. They put punitive money penalty, and they also put severe social sanctions. This last game is especially an innovation compared to the game played in India. And it brought out a lot of insights on how communities can manage their collective action in managing natural resources. Each of these games played up to a maximum of 7 rounds. The game will be over if the water is depleted in the middle of the game, say in the 5th round, we will go to the next type of game. So the maximum game they can play is 7 rounds. Go to the next.
5 minutes more. Yeah.
So we also use supplementary tools, community debriefing, where we bring other participants and do the brainstorming. In addition, we also hold focus group discussion in treatment and control Kabale. We did this even after 6 months, just to compare the medium term effect. Next slide. Now, the key result is, based on this, the study assessed the immediate learning effect by comparing the perception before and after the game. The result shows visible immediate shifts in mental models. As you can see from the first graph, before the game, less than 60% of the participants believed that other farmers pumping water around will reduce the availability of groundwater. But this number increased to 80%, which means they begin to perceive the effect of others pumping water. This result is revealed that groundwater is a shared and suitable resources. They begin to understand this, and they also begin to take some collective action, rules, and importance. They begin to recognize the importance of communication, collective action, rules, and others.
Doctor, you have 3 minutes left.
Okay, next slide. I have only 2 slides. Participants were asked, in addition, they were asked what they think should be done to improve groundwater availability. They suggested different solutions. The result of the comparison before and after and between male and male participants showed considerable changes. The number of participants considering increasing the depth of water takes as an important solution for increasing the water availability. But this changes, and they begin to perceive crop rotation and taking some collective action to restrict the use was observed in the comparison between and after, as you can see in the circle graphs. Next. Finally, we also compared the medium-term effect using the focus group discussion that was made after 6 months. And we were able to see farmers still recollect the lesson from the game. And we also have seen some communities establishing some collective actions. And in few areas, they started to adopt some rules to restrict water use and to manage water collectively. The problem was the problem in the area, water shortage, has not reached urgency level because still available, and they don't still feel the problem. The other problem is we carried out
Doctor,
the
you
focus
have
group
1 minute.
discussion in wet. I have finished.
If you go to the conclusion.
Okay, this is my part. The next part will be presented by Hagar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abi. Thank you very much, Dr. Ficado. And this is just to quickly show that we did some regression analysis where we find that there's significant learning with each round of the game, and with allowing communication especially to improve cooperation and water conserving behavior. And especially these rounds of communications had significant effect on the women groups, while the election of rules rounds had significant effects on both men and women to choose more water-saving crops. And so finally, some implications and lessons we learned is, first, we looked at how this community debriefing was very important after the game to have this discussion with all the community for learning, for spillover effects beyond just the number of people who play the game, but also to shed light on local governance concerns like equitable access to groundwater, etc. We find that these games provide an initial scalable experiential learning opportunity for groundwater collective action challenges, but it's only a key first step to sort of raise that awareness and bring that cognitive, normative, and relational learning. And so the knowledge part, and particularly also the motivation part that Ruth talks about in her framework. But then we also need some sort of deeper, longer-term engagement that's more targeted with communities to go through as an important also next step. And we are talking about thinking of embedding this in sort of larger technical assistance intervention packages, or with local extension as part of a program, or with practitioners on the ground for continued interaction, and also to equip communities with other tools, things and knowledge like accurate local crop water requirements for their own local area, or aquifer mapping to know how much groundwater they have, etc. And so here we can draw some lessons from the India example, where this game was first piloted and has been scaled up with a big NGO, Foundation for Ecological Security in India. And they've been implementing this game widely as part of their activities, along with also other planning tools like crop water budgeting, and doing so on a landscape level, so with many villages, and also by embedding these tools with big government program at Bhujal Yojana as a way of scaling this up. And finally, just to see that these implementation of rules and the collective action to come together on the community level is a longer term process compared to just individual changes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agar. The next speaker is Mr. Brian. He is presenting on considering toolkits and strategies for groundwater nexus governance in Ethiopia. The floor is yours. 10 minutes. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Brown.
Sorry, I'm
You are on
sorry.
mute.
I had
Okay, you were.
unmuted. Okay, thank you. So I'll be talking about tools and strategies for groundwater nexus governance. And this fits with what you've been hearing about NEXUS Gains and the request from the government to look at key elements that can support Ethiopian groundwater governance and how policy can support better governance and the framework we've heard, and then the policy tools, including the groundwater game and other things. And in my talk, I'll be focusing particularly on three key opportunities for strengthening Nexus governance for multiple use of shallow groundwater, enhancing groundwater recharge, and governing linkages between groundwater and surface water. And also, if I have time, to talk a little bit about water tenure assessment and polycentric governance. What I'm talking about draws on the previous work Ruth mentioned, and also mainly desk review of available documents in Ethiopia, including previous work trying to think about groundwater development and groundwater policy and various things, some of which are published, some of which didn't get published, or drafts, which can still give a basis for working on in the future. As we began this work, we looked back and appreciated work the International Water Management Institute had earlier done, looking at the diversity, the many different tools for groundwater governance. However, unfortunately, a major conclusion of that work is that there are lots of tools, but they often don't work very well. And in particular, that top-down or state-led approaches that tried to mainly rely on permits and the hopes of metering and measuring water and volumetric control often turn out to be difficult to implement, not just because of the technical problems, but the institutional realities and political economy and difficulties of doing this. So these are not tools that are sitting on the shelf. You can just take them and use them right away. They need to be often adapted and fitted to contexts. So we also looked at the kind of different sets of tools or toolkits in different countries and what had been done, both traditional mechanisms, institutions like spacing wells, protection zones for water quality, but those on their own are often not enough once people get boreholes and motorized pumps. And again, trying to rely too much on licensing and permitting doesn't seem often to work well. In India, interesting creativity of different approaches to think about groundwater recharge, to actually separate supplies of electricity for electrically powered pumps to guarantee reliable electricity for communities, and then at particular times of the day, electricity for pumps as an innovative, creative approach, or approaches emphasizing information, which can make a difference, but looks like it's not always enough on its own. And to think about, okay, voluntary coordination and government support, and to think about, again, how these tools can shift information and knowledge, draw on a broader range of motivation, including identity, morality, norms, how people care about the family, community, environment, and different mechanisms for agency, like coordinating crop choices, access to agency, building trust, or drawing on existing institutions. And so we had identified in that work kind of three priority areas, including concern about solar pumping and such. But looking at the material in Ethiopia, it helps to think how to look at things more broadly. And so again, we come out with these three broader priorities, which I'll talk about fairly quickly now. And later on, there'll also be a discussion paper to say more about this. So as Ethiopia has had great success in expanding access to drinking water, but the question of how to both build on that, expand access to irrigation, but not endanger the availability for drinking water, the need to have a better informed process for groundwater development, and interesting work in Ethiopia, as well as other places, on what participatory monitoring together with communities can do to make a difference. Sorry, I didn't turn on my camera. So the implication here is to think about what policy can do to support local monitoring and management is the first of these three topics. The second one is to look more deliberately and systematically at the potential for improving groundwater recharge. Again, there's interesting examples and successful experience. Oh, thank you, Ruth. That was my 5-minute warning. Successful experience with groundwater recharge. And in a sense, you can think about, and the hydrologists, this will be very familiar, aquifers as an underground reservoir, and you don't have to build a great big structure. If you can put the water in there, and from a social institutional point of view, also, how do you think about who gets access to that? And if that's very important for a drought reserve, how do you try and make sure the water is actually there when you really need it? And for recharge, we can think about what can be done together with watershed conservation and rainwater harvesting. There's also, as many of you may know, work on road design to mitigate flooding and enhance irrigation and recharge. Where there is surface irrigation, how that can be combined together and support storage of water in the underground, and the opportunities for managing aquifer recharge both through surface water and groundwater. But again, to take a systematic, deliberate approach, which may require negotiation and talking about, okay, who's going to get this water and how to do it, and to think about how policy can support that. Okay. The third area is to pay attention to where the underground water flows out again in springs, wetlands, base flows to rivers and streams, and to be able to manage that, including the ways water crosses boundaries at multiple scales, and how to do things that can try and minimize harm and mitigate where necessary. And again, how policy can support that. And then to just briefly point out, particularly a place like Ethiopia with many rich variety of cultures, diverse geography, many existing local institutions for already managing water and land, and how to understand and build on those, and that their methodologies for water tenure assessment, which the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization has helped to support, that can be useful tools. There are also a set of ideas on polycentric governance, and that's something that I've written about, and Ruth also, to think about when you have multiple levels of government and you have cross-cutting boundaries and river basins, and how to govern things not just top-down, but also not to say just bottom-up, but how to combine those, and also sideways, peer-to-peer cooperation. You don't always have to have the people above coming in to regions may be able to work things out between themselves, or just request specific support from a higher level. And thinking about problem feds, and there's a conceptual framework for this. So again, this is another set of, in this case, intellectual tools. So to close here, just to say again, there are many tools, but they need to be adapted, and a process that starts from the actors and think about their knowledge, motivation, and agency, and involves those stakeholders. And then we suggest that 3 priority areas are: how do we better use and safely use, sustainably use shallow groundwater for multiple use? So that's informed by participatory monitoring and management. The multiple ways to enhance recharge and plan and negotiate so that that storage will be available to meet needs and equitably available, and governing the linkages between groundwater and surface water, what policy water can do to support that. And with that, I will stop and hand back to Ambassador Seleshi in our next session with panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. It's my pleasure now to invite 3 highly capable and distinguished professionals when it comes to groundwater in Ethiopia. The three professionals are first Professor Teen Alamayeno, who is Professor of Hydrology at Addis Ababa University, Hydrogeology. Second is Professor Saifu Kabbada, Professor of Groundwater at University of KwaZulu-Natal and Addis Ababa University. The third panelist is Dr. Taye Alemayo, currently advisor to the Ministry of Water and Energy on groundwater. We are already a little bit late in terms of time, so I didn't try to recap what have been presented, but very ably the panelists could reflect back on the three presentations. First, the three will take 3 minutes each in the order I introduced them, and the panelists first reflect on the presentation for 3 minutes. Then we'll open it for participants' questions and answers. The floor is yours, Professor Teen Alam.
Thank you very much. Wherever you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I will try to reflect on 3 important issues. The importance of groundwater in Ethiopia is obvious. With growing climatic climate change challenges, the issue of groundwater management is vital. Groundwater has always been a very important resource in the lives of the community. Groundwater has never been given due attention at the highest level, but in recent years, institutional issues have been to a certain extent addressed. A number of basins have been also studied. There are encouraging developments in relation to groundwater management issues. With particular considerations in relation to this venue is our level of knowledge about groundwater resources in the country is limited, because this is critical to set selected basins to manage properly. So our level of understanding about groundwater as a whole is quite limited. This demands a more systematic and integrated effort to know the groundwater resources available, which is important for management. Another important issue is institutional and policy gaps that needs to be addressed. We have quite old water management policies. Groundwater has never been given its level of attention in the previous policies. Hopefully new policies are going to come. That policy gap needs to have special considerations to address groundwater challenges. Another important issue is the issue of coordinated efforts or nexus governance. Often groundwater is seen in isolation from surface water or the energy ecosystem and food nexus. So river basin management has not been given due attention. This needs special also consideration. Now, to address the critical challenge of the use of groundwater in Ethiopia, we cannot consider the multifaceted problems at once. So we need to have priorities. Two important priorities need to be considered. Currently, a number of cities in Ethiopia are facing growing depletion of groundwater, including the capital. And also shallow groundwater has been also used in the Rift Valley in a number of basins. Some environmental concerns are emerging. So these issues need to be given priorities in the water management efforts. Another issue is the coordination among the role players in the sector. The efforts are fragmented. There is no coordinated effort to solve problems, and also
Professor, please wind up. Please wind up in a question and answer session. We'll have a chance again to come back.
So at last, I would like to say that the coordinated effort is required to address groundwater challenges in the coming years. Back to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Professor Sefu, please continue.
So thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. And this afternoon, I had a very interesting topic on groundwater governance, and an attempt by IFPRI to put behavioral science at the center of groundwater management. Moving from a system that is based on reward and punishment, top-down policy, regulatory approaches, and then assuming that behavioral science would solve the problems. So they attempted some experiments in Ethiopia and elsewhere. This is quite interesting and thought-provoking. And as one of an ardent reader of Peter Senge, the fifth discipline, which puts mental model at for organizations to be efficient or effective and come up with a positive result. And then this work assumes that mental models or working around mental models of the users, groundwater would be better governed. This is quite, I would say, interesting and ambitious at the same time. Reading from Peter Senge, the book, The Fifth Discipline, the first stage in altering, or bringing metanoia or change in mindset is personal mastery and the role of individuals to be self-actualized and then think beyond their own, narrow interests. So in that regard, one of my questions was around what is the role of wealth status among different people and differences in mindset among individuals in altering the outcome. Well, I think this approach assumes that everybody is good. And then from the experiment in the field, in one of the sites, I've seen like 20%, at least 20% of the farmers responding what was not expected. 80% have agreed on certain outcome, but 20% didn't agree. And then what would be the role of those 20% in affecting the overall outcome? Because mental models are not always collaborative. If you see game theory, the other approach, game theory, I would say, one hawk can disturb 99 doves. And then, so what is the role of heterogeneities in inside the community in affecting the outcome? And then having said this, in the experiments that we have done in the field, so the communities or the farmers before the experiment and after the experiment, you have witnessed changes in mindset and then change in learning. And then does that mean learning will be eventually converted to action? So how far the experiment has been observed really experimentally or empirically, because sometimes people would be impelled to answer or to behave in a particular way under a controlled environment. So what is the role of impellation or expectations that the farmers would, after learning, are expected to answer in a certain way? Well, what I've seen said so far is more of theoretical, and also from the introduction and then the attempt to put, reward punishment to more of behavioral science. So I remain theoretical now, for now. Nevertheless, I have also a few other questions, like what is the role of shocks? During shocks, would people behave same way? It's like when people are stressed or when people are under constrained environment, how would they respond? Like climatic shocks. And then attempts to apply this in India and in Ethiopia and many other places. And there is also the baseline conditions. In India, we have sufficient a priori experiment or experimentation by the people, by the communities themselves. And then in Ethiopia, maybe less so. And then what is the role of a priori learning in affecting the outcome from your research? And then
Professor,
yeah,
your
so I'm
time is
done.
almost up.
These are my questions. Nevertheless, let me appreciate it is a fantastic job and it's a fantastic experiment. Yeah, a lot to explore at different scales. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure. Let me reflect very briefly on the previous Dr. Kibede's comments. I appreciate your notes on the behavioral assumptions. Now, we should be very clear that these games are only an opening, and especially in Ethiopia, we were not able to do as complete a job as, as we have been in India, for example, in terms of really working to, because one of the big things we know from our work in India is that it's very important to have follow-up work also, that it's not just, you don't do it just once off with these games. They're not a solution. It's more, they're perhaps, the analogy I use is plowing the ground. Plowing the ground alone won't give a crop without the seeds and the fertilizer or other things, but plowing will make it more amenable to the seed. Okay, so I think if we have Dr. Taye here.
So while waiting, I think panelists could address the questions. The first one is, what were the criteria for selection of areas and communities for the mental model game? In fact, this belongs to the presenters, not the panelists. Think about the response. And then the second one, present from Hagar. Thank you, Dr. Seifu, for reflections on the games. Lots of food for thoughts and also interesting research question for future research. So this is just a comment. So I would invite Hagar to respond to the first question.
Thank you. Yes, I can give some reflection on that. So our criteria was, first we had to look for places where groundwater is sufficiently used for irrigation, where there are enough farmers who are irrigating in the dry season, and areas where groundwater is kind of always available, so it's not seasonal. And confined, meaning that localized aquifers, meaning that if the community were to improve on its internal practices, so if they were to save their groundwater, they would see the effect of that in their community. And it's not that the groundwater would go then to different areas of the country, for example. So I wanted to see places where, hydrologically, they could see the gains of their cooperation and their collective action and their conservative behavior, water conservation behavior. And then we also, this was part of a Feed the Future USAID project. So there were also like specific places where this project was working, and so we had to choose an area where that was the case, and that's how we ended up with the Tetra region that Dr. Fikad explained.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Dr. Alemayo, could you make intervention? We don't hear you yet. So another question says, I'm Mogas from Siwi. I think we need to be mindful of the wisdom that helps to transform knowledge and information into actions and problem solving. Wise water uses are considered of social justice and future regeneration. This is comment. Anyone can reflect on conforming this.
Okay, Ambassador, if it's okay, I might respond to
Yes, please.
Seifo's comment, and then looking at the time, I'm afraid we probably may need to finish this a bit more quickly than we might like. But we can also continue conversations in many other ways. So in terms of a key question of, not everybody is always so nice and cooperative. What do you do about the other 20% or 10 or 2% or whatever? To answer that on a couple levels. One, the practical level of the community, and if you look at the paper about the groundwater games, people said, with governing other things in their community, they had plenty of experience with dealing with the problem that not everybody follows the rules. How do you deal with that? The first time you may just give them a warning. Some communities are more gentle, some are more strict. So there's local knowledge and experience, which if people then see, oh, wait a minute, groundwater is also shared, we can work together. The more theoretical answers in terms of game theory, it's having evolutionary stable strategies, ways to cope with the fact that some people may be more opportunistic. And then the broader evidence on governing commons from El and Rostrum, that it turns out communities actually are quite creative and in many cases effective on dealing with this kind of behavior. If there's nothing urgent, then we should probably move on to the next phase of the breakout groups. Is that, Ruth? Okay.
Just perhaps last question to the panelists, because we have taken time from earlier during the presentation. So just to be fair, I would like to add one question. Any one of them could respond. One is, what is the dynamic of research to policy making or practice uptakes? Could you reflect on that, because you are researchers as well? You are observing or research jungle on the policy making and as well as the practice side. So how do you see the current situation in Ethiopia, and what do you advise for researchers and policymakers? So obviously we know certain gaps are there, but if you could reflect and suggest some way of handling this from your experience. Professor Seifu or Professor Tenala?
yeah, let me give us a chance to Prof. Tenalem and then see if I could come in later. Or Taye, Dr. Taye is also sitting there.
Taye is not audible at the moment.
Oh, okay, maybe
Professor
until
Tenalem, you are
Tenalem
on
comes.
mute. Professor Tenalem, you are on mute if you are speaking. Why not Professor Sef will just give us a couple of highlights and then we proceed to next session.
Yeah. Yeah, let me start from a framework I had in mind some 10 years ago about policy to science to policy interaction in Africa, and then how that has evolved over time, very briefly. 10, 15 years ago, I had the view that there are three big circles. One is African science, then the second is African governments, policymakers, and the third is international development partners or financing organizations. And then I would say most of the science to policy decision making in African policy-making circles used to come from the finances, mostly financiers doing the research and advising the governments and governments taking actions. And then the space for African science is like, I would say, the term I used that time was ghettoization of African science. So it is just growing on its own, in its own sphere, and not really interacting with these two spheres. The two spheres are the policy-making spheres and the financing, because policy-making without financing will not be successful anyways. Yeah, policy is not converted to action. So that is like 10, 15 years ago. Nevertheless, over the last decade, I could see some, growing closure and move of African science, and then also influencing African policy making. And then I think the circles are interacting now, not perfectly matching. And then we have like three corners where the three meet. I think that is an idealized situation whereby we have that central point where the three circles join. African science, financing from whichever source comes, and science from there, and then decision taking. I think these circles are closing to each other more theoretically, and then I can give examples later if time permits.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is our
Thank you, Professor Saifu. Thank you so much. Now I hand over the facilitation to Mr. Bruns. Please proceed.
Good. Okay, so what we're next going to do is separate into breakout groups. And we'll have about 15 minutes or so for discussion in those groups. We have two key questions, which are here on the screen, and also we'll put in the chat a link to a document with the questions. We'll ask each group to choose someone to moderate the discussion and choose someone else to take notes, to be a rapporteur or scribe. Discuss the questions, and the moderator should help give everyone a chance to talk. The note taker can put the key points, you don't have to record everything, but key points into the document. And then after the breakout room, everyone will turn to the main meeting, and rather than spending a long time having each group one by one report, we'll give about 3 minutes for people to look at the document and look at what the other group said, and then we'll proceed to plenary discussion.
Thank you so much. In our group, we have raised some issues, one of which is our water resource management policy is so obsolete and we need to review it. And also, we considered the research on policymakers. We have been holding meetings in forums. We are raising that groundwater should be managed in this way, but that is not really well taken by decision makers. So we need to do a research similar to that done on community level. Then we have to design a mechanism how to persuade them. And also we need to advocate the benefit of using groundwater so that users are interested to really change their mind and be able to use the resource in a sustainable manner. And also we need to consider some innovative way of doing things, like introducing new technology. Groundwater exploitation, even exploration, is very costly. We need to get some funds, and how do we get funds, and how to efficiently use the resource. I submit, dear Chair.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. Again, you're welcome to raise your hand, but I see Mogus Shiparaz but comment in the chat. So, Dr. Mogus, if you wanted to unmute and speak up, please.
Thank you. I'm suggesting actually the importance of considering the property rights system for groundwater governance because it is highly connected with different sectors and also levels. Unless we have a properly designed, engineered property rights system, it's very difficult also to see that governance at ground level, system level. So I'm suggesting the application of system engineering actually to really help us to understand, also link the different actors, sectors, and also levels, as well as factions at different levels. Thank you. Over to you.
Okay. Please invite other comments, but I will take the liberty of responding a bit that in terms of understanding groundwater property rights and the rules and norms that affect water use is something I and Ruth and Claudia have all done a lot of work on before, and can be very fascinating. And I had to kind of restrain myself in making my presentation from going into all kinds of details of there are plenty of international lessons about some things that don't work so well, and some other things that can be more effective, and things to be careful about. Even countries that are known as world leaders on some aspects of water governance and water rights, like Australia, turn out to have made huge and very expensive mistakes also in what they did. And there's a chance for others to learn better and be more careful, in particular not to give away water unnecessarily, and be careful that people are aware they're basically what they're getting is a share of a limited resource, and there may be a need for the community or the region or the nation to come in and say, okay, what can we do to be fair to each other? Okay, I think Dr. Zavani, I see another comment in the chat, so if you wanted to talk again, and anyone else is also very much invited to add.
No, that is it. I have already talked about it, and just to put it in the chat box. Thank you.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. Okay.
There are also some really good questions and answers in the Q&A section. I'm trying to answer some of them, but Mohammed Saleh Boru asks one that this was from Ubetu Anle from the Space Science and Geospatial Institute, asks a very good question that I don't think we outsiders are necessarily able to reply, but maybe others can give thoughts on. Who is responsible for protecting the groundwater resources? And in what ways does the local community protect groundwater resources? I have thoughts on the first that I'll put into the chat, but if others wanted to talk about thoughts on responsibility. My first reaction on that is that it's no single person or organization's responsibility, but some form of shared responsibility for addressing groundwater, but others may have a way to respond to that. I have thoughts on that.
Shall I make comment on this particular question?
Yeah. Sure.
No? Yeah. Who is responsible to protect groundwater in the country? I think the mandate goes to Ministry of Water and Energy at federal level. Many investments, people coming with investment proposal that utilizes both surface and groundwater. More so on groundwater, actually seek permission to drill wells wherever it is in the country. Regional governments and cities also look into in their region in providing permissions to water bureaus and water supply and sanitation agencies, etc. But in certain cases, the bureau itself is the user of groundwater. When you say water bureau, therefore there is some conflict of interest. That is in the side of permits. When it comes to the protection side, I think there is no as such clear mandate, but many institutions have written mandates like Ethiopian Environmental Protection Agency, in the region also, the respective bureaus should protect the groundwater. But it also related to the permission and the like. So those things have to be reviewed, and new policy directives and utilization strategy must be put in place. In certain areas, there is significant encouragement for utilizing groundwater, but in certain areas, already serious constraints are there, like in the surrounding of Addis Ababa, in the sub-basins of Awash Basin, where extensive groundwater exploitation is happening, and pollution and the like are real risks and dangers. Especially the groundwater basin that Addis Ababa Water Supply is using is downstream of Addis Ababa City. As you know, Addis Ababa City has a lot of pollution that mixes with surface water and move on to downstream to pollute groundwater. So these are real challenge. Researchers must look at it. Practitioners must observe how to exploit groundwater sustainably, and decision makers really need to take this seriously. I am done.
Yeah. May I come in, Ruth? Yeah, I think the presentation IFPRI made this afternoon is thought-provoking. And then, sitting here and listening, I was looking into my own mental model, and then in trying to answer this question, who is, responsible? I would have said before the presentation that, of course, it is a role and the mandate of the government, policies, regulatory frameworks, guidelines, tools, etc. Well, that is an approach by itself. Yeah, it's not good, bad. It depends on the local situations. Nevertheless, the importance of bottom-up, starting from the individual mastery, individual farmers, and then group of farmers, communities, and then going up into but someone has to connect the bottom up and the top down. There must be shared vision by the government and by the people, or the governance and the people. And then this shared vision can be in the form of soft power, driving inspirations, driving farmers to behave positively. And then at the same time, also, I don't want to underestimate the role of sticks, carrot and sticks, because not everybody would buy to that shared vision. And then in that case, the top-down approach will need to also be implemented. There are complexities. So I think both ways, government setting the vision and then individual farmers buying into those vision, and then to implement this, some sort of top down, not very much. Some top down is still required in certain contexts. So that is what I would say. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth, I think we're at time and people may have to move on to something at the hour. So whether we move to our closing speaker from government and then you.
Yes, we are toward the end
Yes.
of sessions.
Yes, and then in my closing remarks, I'll talk about how we may be able to respond to some of the remaining questions that are open here.
Yes, please go ahead, Ruth.
I think our government,
Kavedi Gerba, advisor of the ministry.
Ruth may, link to what she has just said and then make her closing on IFPRI side, and Dr. Kabada will come then after.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, thank you all very much for this really rich discussion. And I hope this is only the opening of a discussion. I've actually seen a number of people from India and Nepal and other places that have experiences with this that were keen to engage and learn from Ethiopia as well. So I really thank you all very much for the very active participation. And let me go through both a more logistic follow-up and then a broader set of follow-up. In terms of logistics, we have everyone will get a copy of the presentations, and access, we will try to make access to the recording available. We also will save these notes from the breakout rooms and share those to you when we send out the presentations. So that, and then I'll attach the Q&A and a summary from the chat. In the Q&A, we have not been able to fully respond to all of the questions, but we'll try to do some more detailed responses to those when we send that out. So that's just sort of to say that even though we opened up a lot of enthusiastic discussion, that we will be following up on that. The second is to say that we recognize that a short-term input is not going to solve or even create the conditions for addressing the emerging groundwater challenges in Ethiopia. We hope this will be part of an ongoing partnership. The CGIAR NEXUS Gains initiative that Claudia discussed at the opening is officially ending at the end of this year, but it is becoming part of a much larger program on a a CGIAR program on policies and institutions. As part of that, we want to be very demand-driven, and so we hope to be able to continue this discussion with you about what kinds of research and action would be useful from CGIAR. It may be to perhaps do some exploratory scaling up of other community level interventions and see how effective they are, what kinds of adaptations are useful for Ethiopia. They may be other kinds of higher level policy engagements, hopefully in person, as well as online. So we know that much is being done. There is a great deal of expertise in Ethiopia, and we hope that we can provide some assistance through applied, policy relevant, and community relevant research. So with that, I will thank all of our presenters and Brian Bruns, and especially His Excellency, the Ambassador, who has done so much to bring us all together, and look forward to further interaction on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I now invite His Excellency Dr. Kabbada Garba, as advisor to the Minister, to make the closing remark of the government.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. So, as we come to the conclusion of this insightful and productive discussion, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the participants, speakers, and organizers. And also, it's a great pleasure for me to make some closing remarks. As it was mentioned, groundwater is indeed a lifeline for Ethiopia, serving as a vital source of drinking water that more than 80% of the country's domestic water supplies depend on, and playing a central role in our plans to expand irrigated agriculture. However, with rapidly growing demands for freshwater resources, especially from groundwater, due to population growth, urbanization, increased industrialization, and climate change, sustainable management of these resources is crucial, and it demands appropriate policy interventions focusing on regulation and licensing, pollution control, establishing robust monitoring systems, public awareness, research and development, and transboundary cooperation where the groundwaters are international. So with this growing demand for groundwater resource, there are emerging challenges, as the previous speakers have mentioned, due to several factors, including the many actors involved in groundwater management, including industrialists, agricultural sector, cities, and so on. So we need to overcome these challenges through appropriate policy interventions. Today's discussion have highlighted the critical importance of effective governance to ensure that these precious resources used productively equitably and sustainably. So the conceptual frameworks, the methods, and different approaches in manage groundwater that the speakers raised are so important for us, especially for the Ministry of Water and Energy, who is one of the major policymakers in groundwater governance. The lessons learned from the groundwater games and related tools have provided us with the practical insights and potential next steps to improve our practices. I'm particularly encouraged by the strategies discussed for strengthening NEXUS governance for water, energy, food, and ecosystem. The integration of these elements is crucial for achieving sustainable development and ensuring the well-being of our community. So we need to implement the various tools that fit to our context, including enhancing groundwater recharge, multiple use, controlling over extraction or abstraction, well spacing, and so on. So as we move forward, let us focus on the identified priorities and methods that can support effective groundwater governance. Collaboration among stakeholders, multiple uses of shallow groundwater, enhancing the aquifer recharge, and understanding the linkage between groundwater and surface water are key areas that require our continued attention and concerted efforts. The Ministry of Water and Energy is ready to play its part in addressing existing challenges through scientific research, policy intervention, public awareness, and international cooperation. It will continue its effort to organize similar events that help to make informed decisions. Currently, the ministry is undertaking groundwater potential assessment in 116,000 square kilometer area that cover about 10% of the country's national total land mass in order to bridge the information gap that we have in the country so that appropriate monitoring and management methods could be established. So I would like to thank our esteemed moderator, Dr. Ambassador Leshi Bakale, and all our distinguished speakers for their valuable contributions. Special thanks to Dr. Ruth, Dr. Fikadu, Galau, Hagar Eldid, Dr. Brian Brans, Dr. Taye Alamayo, Dr. Tammana Tenalam Ayano, Dr. Saifu Kabade, and all others who I couldn't mention by name. So finally, I would like to express my appreciation to all workshop participants for your active engagement and thoughtful discussion. Your commitment to improving groundwater governance in Ethiopia is truly commendable. Let us carry the momentum of this workshop forward and work together towards a future where groundwater resources are managed sustainably, ensuring prosperity and resilience for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kabada. Thank you all participants, speakers, facilitators. I think without, now we are a little bit over time, without further ado, I would say the workshop is adjourned. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much.